What happens when water is exposed to EMF, or wireless radiation? Here's something you may not know. Water is conscious, and it responds vibrationally to whatever it is exposed to. At OMNIA, we've done an experiment where we froze and photographed 3 samples of water. Water which was not exposed to EMF radiation, the baseline, looked like this. Water which was exposed to an EMF field, a 5G radiation field in fact, looked like this. And water which was exposed to EMF that is balanced by the OMNIA radiation balancer looked like this. See the difference? Remember, your body is 70% water. And here's a special offer for the Journey to Truth crowd. Just enter the word truth in caps at the checkout for your 10% discount.
Hey guys, welcome back to the show. Just a reminder, our webinar is coming up this Sunday. I think we haven't decided on a time yet, Aaron, maybe like 5 Central-ish, 4 or 5 Central.
Sounds good. We'll about that.
We'll figure out a time and we'll let you know when we share out the link. But so on our Patreon, if you're not a member, it's only $5 to sign up. We do monthly or bi-monthly webinars. Would bi-monthly be twice in 1 month, or would that be every other month?
I think it can be either one, actually.
That's interesting.
I've heard it can be both, depending on what you want it to mean. So
either way, it's really hard. It's really hard to do once a month without just throwing something out to be throwing it out. So we want to make sure it's something actually worth tuning into. So energetically,
every other month. Every other month. There you go. To be clear, yeah.
So, but it's going to be this Sunday, September 24th. The Patreon link is below in the description. If you feel you want to join us and sign up, you can do that below. We'd love to see you there. The last one we did make publicly available on cloning, the clone webinar, and you can go back and watch that on our channel if you wish. And as you know, our documentary, Cahokia, Mounds, the Untold Story, is now out, and you can watch that documentary below in the description at cahokiauntold.com, or you can just Google it. You should find it. It should pop right up. And we've been getting some great feedback on that. So please, if you like it, share it with your friends and family. We'd love for everyone to see it. It's our first attempt at a full-length documentary, and I think it turned out well. So that being said, today we are joined by Maureen Richmond. She is an astrologer, among many other things. And I personally don't know. I've never been completely into astrology, and I realize this because I don't fully understand it. And a lot of this, you hear about all of the Mercury retrogrades and all the planetary conjunctions and all this stuff, and how it aligns and affects our global events and all that stuff. And I guess I just never fully understood it. So today in particular, I'd like to cover how astrology affects world events and maybe go back through time and see like different periods where we have specific events, significant events that actually happen on specific astrological alignments. So welcome to the show, Maureen. Before I keep going, I'd like to give you a chance for you to introduce yourself.
Hello, Tyler and Aaron and Journey to Truth. Thank you so much for inviting me here. I'm glad to be speaking with you about this. I follow what you're saying. The situation you described for yourself, Tyler, and you mean to cover Aaron as well and your listeners, is the situation of a lot of people. You hear bits and pieces of astrological information thrown around, but there's no theoretical foundation for you to analyze it or to assess it with. So, that happens to a lot of people. I understand that completely and entirely. Now, by way of introducing myself, I'll tell you that my first interest in astrology began when I was in elementary school here in Little Rock, Arkansas, where I was raised. So, that was a long, long time ago now. And then I began to dig into the technicals or the mathematical part, really, of astrology much later as an adult when I was in my 20s. So there's a symbolic or symbol side to astrology, and everybody's seen it, the glyphs for the planets and the signs of the zodiac and so forth. And you can learn a lot just by studying what those mean. There's plenty of information on the internet for that, but that's not all there is to astrology. Really, it's based on a pretty technical study of the cycles of the planetary bodies in our solar system. Even though the word sounds like it's got to do with stars, ASTR, aster, the bulk of astrological study and discussion is based on the planets in the solar system. So it's, the historical origin of astrology is in the observation of the night sky, which is primarily made of stars. That's where the historical origin is, but the daily practice of it has to do with the planets in the solar system.
Right. And what got my attention is, we did a Zoom call a while back, and it was with Margie Kay, and you briefly were touching on some of the dates, some of the significant events, aligning with the astrological charts or whatever. And that caught my attention because, I hear people talk about this and discuss it all the time. But when we can start to prove that things are actually happening, significant world events are actually happening on these dates. And I think that's tangible. It's something we can, but you don't just prove it once. You had like 100 examples, and you went back over time, and there's different periods, like the 60s, I think then to the late 80s, and then 2012 to 2015 are all three major periods where major world events happen, and including UFO activity and stuff of that nature. So maybe we could just start there, so to help our audience understand that something does happen and on these times, during these times, and maybe we can cover those periods and then lead up to the current, and then maybe even future predictions, and what this cycles, if it's safe to predict based on what you've seen.
Well, Tyler, you've just hit on all the major questions of metaphysics, just like that. Bam. Let's discuss the reality of time, the place of time in human evolution, and whether or not...
How much time do we have again? Right.
It's like whether or not it is ethical to project particular images in people's minds. Before I begin, let me say this. I am a devoted believer in the metaphysical proposition that we create our own realities.
Mm-hmm.
I am a devoted believer in the notion that our deep subconscious images are what drive our individual and collective lives. So if we really believe that life is horrible and people are monsters and nothing is any good, well, guess what happens? And
that's what's going to show up for you.
It is going to show up. It is going to appear. It is going to become, the drama of your life. If you really believe that the universe is a tiny little place created by a jealous little mind who withholds goodness from all manner of creation, that's going to show up too. So I don't ascribe to any of those beliefs. And I'd really rather project positivity into people's minds, my mind and other people's minds as well. I believe in daily practice of positive affirmations and positive visualization, so that you're taking the energies of creation and moving them and directing them and shaping them towards what you desire. So the astrological influences that come into our situation represent those energies. Right. High voltage electricity on the mental plane. It's all there. You can use it. What are you going to use it for? And there are points in time where we get big blasts of it, and then other times not so much so. Tremendous blasts of it. Yes, Tyler mentioned the mid-1960s. That was one of the big blasts of potential of what we could do with ourselves individually and socially. And it was timed by the conjunction of the planets Uranus and Pluto. Now, those two planets do not come into conjunction with each other very often. About 130 to 135 years in between those events. And a conjunction is a point in time when the two orbits of the planets involved are on the same side of the Earth, such that as we look at it from the Earth, it looks like a line of sight arrangement. That's a conjunction. Now, there are other arrangements in the solar system that are also important. They're not as easily described or as easily discerned, but the conjunction is like billiard balls lined up one behind another, as perceived through the zodiac, which is the space around the Earth. So that's a good thing to be talking about, a conjunction. So it doesn't come very often. Well, in the mid-1960s, it did. And the two energies of the planets blend when there's a conjunction. So it was a blending of what Uranus and Pluto signify and colored by the sign in the zodiac where it happened, which was the sign of Virgo. So, you've got a question, Tyler. Go right ahead.
I'm just going to say, so what can you explain what type of events we saw in the 60s that would stand out in your mind?
Yes, well, precisely. That's the right question to ask. What happened during that period? It was a time of tremendous social, economic, and geopolitical upheaval. There were history-making wars. There were race riots all over the United States, and that's a deep topic that we should look into. There was a revolution in art and music and dance, a cultural revolution that repudiated the norms of previous time in Western civilization as to what was considered allowable, polite, and appropriate. The fusion of or the use of blues music to create rock and roll arose during that period of time. That's what happened. That was the big awakening, and all the change in dance forms and fashions and styles and types of relationships and social interactions flowed from that, from the lyrics and from the driving beat. And it changed everything because we had a very staid society before that. And the haircuts were very straight and everything was, tacked down and rigid, and body positions were very frozen. And after that, we had loose movement, people dancing and free and interacting with each other in this completely different changed circumstance. Sexual revolution.
The hippie movement. Yeah, the Beatles, Rolling Stones.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
And space travel and space communication, that was at the forefront.
And a terrific increase in the number of reports of UAP, UFO, or whatever you would like to call them.
UFO, sightings were off the charts in the 60s.
So it's like a breakthrough in consciousness almost.
Very much so. Excellent way to describe it. Fantastic. I love what you said. That's right. It was a breakthrough. And almost every time that we have an intensive activation from planetary arrangements, it can be a breakthrough in consciousness. Every single time. The potential is there. Specifically in the 1965 era, the potential was described by the planets, the archetypes, Uranus, Pluto, and Virgo. And so that's what we need to dig into next to see how that really reflected during that time. So Virgo is an analytical sign. We were just now talking about the development of the space program and greater awareness of UFOs. And of course, there were technological developments all over the place. Computer technology was cooking in the background. It hadn't become widely used by the public, but it was back there in the military and in the corporate environments being developed during that time. Chip technology, digital technology, all that stuff was hiding in the background. Medical technology was changing radically. Science curricula in schools were changing. So Virgo has to do with all of that. It's a very intellectual, analytical, scientific and mathematical persuasion, Virgo. And that's where the conjunction was. It was Uranus-Pluto conjunction in the mid degrees of Virgo. Uranus itself symbolizes revolutions and modernization because it was discovered in the modern era. It was the first of the planets of our solar system to be discovered through means other than the direct observation of the unaided human eye. There was some science involved in discovering that. And then Pluto which is still used in astrology no matter what NASA says. Pluto symbolizes the same things that the god for which it is named did, and that was a Greek Hades, the god of death and rebirth. So those two archetypes, or three archetypes, blending together gave us what we experienced. And it was a time like no other. We haven't had a parallel period of time yet, and won't for quite some time.
So I guess it would indicate that there's cycles. So this will happen again, and we should expect a similar era when they do conjunct. So then the next one was the 80s. And so what was in conjunction in the 80s?
Late 80s, in 1988 was the Saturn-Uranus conjunction. That's a shorter cycle. Those two planetary bodies come into conjunction once every 45 years. And so the one previous to that had occurred in the early years of World War II, in the early 1940s. So in 1988, Saturn and Uranus were conjunct in the late degrees of Sagittarius. And that really, it's not as powerful as the Uranus-Pluto conjunction, but it certainly had an effect, and it changed a lot of people's lives. There was a lot of movement and change within the United States. I have encountered people all the time that tell me that they moved across state lines in 1988, and Sagittarius is a traveling sign. There were many other things that happened in the world as well around that period of time. Certainly the setup for the rise of the internet was getting ready to happen, and innovations in computing were happening at that point in time. And then in 1989, Saturn conjuncted or made a conjunction with Neptune. It's very rare that Saturn will make a conjunction to Uranus and then Neptune right in 2 calendar years right next to each other. And the only way that could happen was because Uranus and Neptune were getting ready to make a conjunction with each other, which they did in 1992-93. And that was the real power that was in operation at that time. Those little short Saturn cycles, which they are important, were nothing compared to that one. That one's a 172-year cycle, the Uranus-Neptune. They come into conjunction once every 172 years. So that's really quite powerful. And in the early 1990s, the sign involved was Capricorn, in the 20s of Capricorn, which is the sign in the zodiac, which is symbolic of material power, material success, ambition, corporate structures, executive positions, and things of that nature. So the Uranus-Neptune conjunction in the early 1990s was the occurrence of the new commercial environment, which became the internet, of course. That was the big development right there. And there were many other important events as well that you all will probably remember and want to speak about.
Right. It's just, I think it's great to connect the dots here and show us, because most people, we know, we understand that these were significant eras, but we don't connect them astrologically, not the normal person, until you start learning about it. And then you start, diving into the charts with charts, which how far back do those actually go? I mean, to the beginning of time, right? So,
yes, as long as our solar system has been here, these planetary cycles have been, going through their paces. In the field of astrology, the study of these long-term cycles that I'm talking to you, gentlemen, and your audience about today are not as well studied and popular as certain other parts of astrology that are easier to understand. For example, individual astrology or personal astrology. Some of the same principles can be found in each, but there aren't as many astrologers talking about these long-term cycles as there are talking about individual persons' experiences with finding love or finding a job or finding a house to buy or, an investment that works. It's just not as, right. It's not as frequently discussed. So it's not unusual that you haven't heard much about it.
Yeah. And that is interesting because I hear a lot now, the age of conspiracy theories, I guess you could say, that we're living in a simulated reality, and astrology is proof of this because they're pinpointing things with like such stunning accuracy that it has to be a simulation. This is what some people are saying. And like the birth charts and the zodiac and everything, and it's predicting your personality down to a T based on when you were born, and people are relating this to a type of computer simulation, which I don't know if you've heard that or not, but I'm on TikTok a lot, and this is like one of the big themes on TikTok right now. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, thank you for asking. I feel like we're talking across the chasm of the generations here.
Right.
Well, it really depends on what one means by simulation. To me, a simulation is a less than real thing. It's a projection or something. Right. I don't know. Let me see if I can shortcut to what I think is the bottom line here. I think human life has a great deal of meaning. There are many metaphysical teachings that really don't, for example, some of the Eastern philosophies, which I've studied intensively. I'm a grown-up hippie. I did all that stuff. Some of the Eastern teachings say that, materiality itself is nothing but Maya or illusion, and there is no such thing as time. The Buddhist philosophy goes even further to say that there's really no lasting significance to human identity or human experience, that it's all generated by bundles of karmic tendency called skandhas. And, that may be true, but here's my reading of it. Human life has very definite inherent meaning. It has inherent meaning to the individual experiencing it and to the collective of individual experience considered in the sum total over time. Time is an actual portion of our experience and a critical portion of it. Here's what I think. The astrological birth chart is an imprint of the soul's intention for any given incarnation. The chapters of the life are written right into it, and they're ticked right off in time with the transits to the individual positions that were established at the birth chart. So I've seen this working out in so many people's lives, hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of lives that I've looked at. I have absolutely no doubt about that. So is it a simulation? Well, who's doing the simulating? Well, if you say the great cosmic mind is doing the simulating, I can agree to that. The great cosmic mind has outpictured everything, and everything is happening in the great cosmic mind. That doesn't make it unimportant or unreal.
I don't think you could have answered. Well said. Yeah, I don't think you could have answered that any better. I appreciate that, and I tend to agree with you. That makes perfect sense to me, and I think that everything does have a deep inherent meaning. There is a meaning to life, and I think some of this information that's being pushed right now, that we are in a computer generated simulation, it's almost like Lucifer trying to take away the meaning of life and confuse us and make everything seem less significant, so we just kind of give up hope, like, oh well, this is all just
that's it, Tyler. That is so it. What would be the point of the great cosmic mind manifesting such a rich diversity of individuality if individuality didn't mean anything?
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's preposterous, the whole. Yeah. So I agree with you completely.
And you're right, because what do they do at a very young age in our schools now? They hijack the individuality. They want everybody thinking the same, dressing the same, doing the same thing. They're hijacking our individuality because they're scared of our potential. They know what we're capable of. So, yeah, I agree. And I'd like to move on to the next era of it, the 2012 to 2015 cycle era. And does this relate to the Mayan calendar at all?
Well, the Mayan calendar is constructed along cycles of Venus, which are relatively short, and it does not account for any of these outer planet cycles. So no, they're not operating from the same calculational basis. You could ask the question, well, do they predict the same thing? That's a big question. We'd have to bear down on some specifics to really get around that. But to 2012, 2016, the period there. That's a great question. And you're very intuitive because the implications of that period flow directly from what happened in mid 1960s. Because what was the astrological driver from 2012 to 2016 was a square between the two planets that were in conjunction in 1965 or 1963, 4, 5, and 6. It was a long-lasting configuration. So we probably would benefit from some diagrams here, but I think I can show you with my hands if you'll just think about this with me. When planets are in conjunction, they're in that line of sight relationship. The one that's faster moving speeds up. The other one is slow, staying behind. They're both still going around the sun. If I'm the sun in the middle here. At some point, they're going to get to a 90-degree relationship as seen from the Earth. And that's what a square is. As that thing goes on, eventually they're going to get 180 degrees from each other. That's an opposition. Eventually they're going to get in a closing square with each other. And then finally come back around to another conjunction where they'll again be in a line of sight. It'll be in a different place than it was before. But, it's two moving bodies moving around a central point. The central point is the sun, but the Earth has a specific perspective on that, right?
That was a great visual. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. I'm into this stuff. So in the mid 1960s, Uranus and Pluto were together on one side of the Earth in a conjunction. And it takes a long time for these cycles to mature. By 2012, Uranus had sped ahead and Pluto was lagging behind to the point where they'd gotten to a 90-degree separation in the heavens as seen from the Earth. That's called a square. So there's a very important theory that you need to know about to understand what the relationship between the conjunction and the square is. You won't have any problem with this because if you're a natural animal and you've been paying any attention to what's going on around you in the sky, you know the answer to this. I bet you're natural animals. I bet y'all know well about this. So every month we have the lunar cycle, right? Yeah. And at the beginning of the lunar cycle, we can't see the moon at all. It's dark. And that's because the lit side of the moon is facing the sun and we don't see it. About a week later, or in a few days after that, we start to see a teeny little crescent, which grows and grows and grows. Until about a week later, we can really see a good crescent moon out there. And about 2 weeks later, it just keeps getting fatter and fatter and fatter. And then finally, we've got the great big circular orb of the full moon, right? And then about another week later, it's kind of eaten up just to a little bit of a crescent again. And then finally, it goes back into being completely invisible. Those quarter points in the moon cycle are very important psychospiritually. The conjunction moment, we don't see anything. It's a dark sky. The lunar and solar principles are blending. The lunar is the female. The solar is the male. Everybody has these two characteristics inside of themselves given to them by Mother Nature and Father Sky. We all have them no matter what our stripes are, what our types of sexuality or any race or age or anything. Everybody's got the sun and the moon principle inside of them. And so as a collective, humanity experiences this important ritual of the month. Every month, we go through a psychospiritual ritual together. As we're coming into the old part of the moon, everything in nature is dying down. People want to sleep. They're tired. They want to take a lot of naps. They're not excited about their projects. Oh, I can't run, whatever, And then at the exact new moon moment, the zygote and the sperm, or the egg and the sperm, come together psychospiritually. It's a new mating. It's a new pregnancy every month in the psychospiritual zone or realm. So there is that coming together of the male and female, or the creative principles within us. And then about a week later, we begin to see the results of that. 2 weeks later, we see the full results of it. 3 weeks later, we are able to contemplate on the entire experience from that last beginning and come back to center again at the new beginning of the cycle. This is a psychospiritual journey every month that was identified in the 20th century by astrologer Dane Rudyard, who was born in France, changed his name, came to the United States, was a leading figure in the metaphysical circles of the mid and later 20th century. Dane, D-A-N-E, Rudyard, R-U-D-H-Y-A-R, articulated this theory in his book, The Lunation Cycle. Now, it's a magnificent pattern for understanding. It happens to all of us every single month. But guess what? You can apply the very same thing, conjunction, square, opposition, closing square, conjunction, to the outer planet cycles. And they will tell you what is going on with humanity. So in 1965, with the conjunction, that's like the new moon phase.
Okay.
And that was where the birth of a bunch of new ideas came in. What was it all about? Social justice, people getting along better, a better relationship of the sexes, not just authoritarian males and submissive females, but more of an equals relationship, a better relationship with nature, a better understanding of the human mind. A lot of ideas were born. Not all of them went in the right direction, unfortunately, but new ideas were born. A new social vision was born. We had the civil rights legislation in the United States that was passed during that time. Yeah. So here in 2012, 2016, Uranus and Pluto had done the equivalent of that first quarter in the lunar cycle. That's called the crisis of action. Rudyard called the new moon the crisis of inspiration.
Yep, right.
Crisis. Yeah, crisis.
It's interesting that 2012 seemed to be a point where a lot of people had their, you can call, awakening. Aaron, I know 2012 was a big year for you. Yeah. And a lot of people, though, doing this podcast for almost 5 years now, the people we talked to are like, yeah, I woke up in 2012. Something happened in 2012. I started seeing through the veil, seeing through the illusion. So that would align with what you're telling us.
Yes.
And there was a lot of things that happened in that period. And maybe, like, I don't know, remember, you might have some of those memorized, what significant events happened, and you could help us, take us back to that time and remind us what actually took place then.
I hope I can too.
Well, I didn't know. I thought maybe you had a list or something. You seem to have them.
Well, that would be a good list to have brought with me or to have generated ahead of time. But yes, I can generally remember the period of time. Yes, I can. But let's finish understanding that model first before we get too far lost on that. All right. Okay. So crisis of inspiration is equivalent to the new moon moment, right? Or it is the new moon moment in any cycle, whether you're talking about the lunar cycle or two other planetary bodies moving through their orbits in the solar system and perceived from the Earth. The next critical point is when they're separated by 90 degrees, the first square, and that's the crisis of action, according to Dane Rudyard. Do something about what it was that you were inspired with. And then the opposition, or the full moon phase, when one body is on one side of the Earth and the other is on the opposite, equivalent to full moon. That's the crisis of illumination, full understanding of what the new birth moment was about. Then that closing square, Rudyard called the crisis of conscience or consciousness, and its purpose or role within the overall cycle was to allow people a chance to look back on the entirety of the last sequence of experiences and try to crystallize from it what it was all about, what it meant as a form of knowledge and wisdom coming out of experience that could be carried forward in time as collective and individual wisdom. And then you go back to the original crisis of inspiration for the conjunction or new moon period. Yeah, Tyler, you're thinking of something.
You see, you're reading my mind. I'm just saying, so the 2012, was that the crisis of action?
Crisis of action, okay. Absolutely. So as you can see, this is a very long-term process that's working out in society as a whole. Anything that would develop from 1965 to 2012 is far beyond what's going on in the life of one individual. It will affect the lives of individuals, but it's a process that refers to the collective of humanity. What did we learn in what were we inspired with in 1965? And how did we apply it in 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16? Or did we apply it? Right. Did we? Yes, I think we did, in sort of a messy, disorganized, ragged sort of fashion. I think we did carry a lot of those ideas forward. But let's have a look. So what did we encounter in 2012, 13, 14, and 15? Well, we were coming off of the disastrous financial implosion of 2008-9 period. Many businesses had not yet recovered. Many individuals had not yet recovered. We were still in some degree of financial setback worldwide and nationally here in the United States. You've got some ideas. You wanted to say something. Aaron, you had a thought.
Yeah, so it's interesting looking at this, how these line up with what happened so precisely. So what do you think that it's kind of like the energy that these alignments are creating that are causing things to happen, or is it like what's like the science kind of behind why that's the case, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, great question. So we just jumped up from evidence to theory right now. We're going to temporarily we're going to leave the evidence-based discussion. We're going to jump up to theory. That's fine with me. I'm good with that. That question has been posed and bandied about in the field of astrology since the invention of astrology, or the realization of astrology, which, by the way, may have been given by beings from other star systems to us as a form of mathematical analysis of experience in any given system that has a central star and bodies that orbit around it. I'll get into that later. But anyway, are they causing it? Amongst astrologers, that's precisely how astrological influences are discussed. Let me say that again. Amongst astrologers, when you get a bunch of astrologers together, that's what they'll say. This or that caused this. Well, what caused this? Oh, it was the Mercury-Mars thing. Oh, that did it. Oh, yes, I see. Okay, that was definitely it. But underneath that discussion, we also know that what we're really talking about is an interaction between the field of consciousness of the universe, or the solar system in our case, and human beings. We're really talking about consciousness. Astrology is a descriptor of consciousness, believe it or not. I know that's a mind-bending concept to try to take into your mind. And let me tell you why. It's based on the idea of a circle. Now, can you think of anything more fundamental in nature than a circle? We've got the circle of the horizon. We've got the circle of the year as the Earth goes around the sun. We've got the circle, more or less, created the moon as it goes around the Earth. It's actually elliptical, but the idea of a circle is there. We've got the circle of the year. Whenever people gather to talk to each other, if they mean to talk to each other, they will not line up in rows. They will get in a circle so that they can all face each other. It's based on a circle, the circle of space. Mm-hmm. As an two-dimensional representation of infinity. Circle. And that circle in astrology is divided up by numbers. So the role of number becomes very important here. And I ask you, from whence the idea of number? Do we know where the idea of number came from? No. Humanity intuited the existence of number in order to count.
Right.
Number was pre-existing as a notion in liminal space, or ideational space, or divine mind, if you like. Now, this is exactly what 20th century depth psychologist Carl Jung said, on the basis of what he discovered in people's dreams and subconscious. He said, number is an archetype itself, existing on the archetypal plane. Number is an archetype. In other words, it's a factor in the field of consciousness. So astrology is a way of dividing up time and experience by number. We're working with archetypes that exist in some high dimension. The ancient astrologers understood that astrology was an attempt to connect with the divine mind. The divine mind. Big claim for the modern world to take, to hear, that discussed, but that's what they were talking about back then. They were sky observers. They were spiritual seekers. Astronomy and astrology had not yet split. Theology and celestial observation were like that. The purpose of celestial observation in the beginning was to discern the will of the Great One.
Right.
It was understood in the divine psychology and theology of the ancients that the Great One spoke through the stars and through the movements of the planets. So why do they think that? Well, because they could see the night sky. We can't even see it anymore.
Right.
Every night they'd go out and have their minds blown with the evidence of infinity.
Right. And we can't, we just see light pollution now.
We have we can only see it through photographs. We have a lot of good photographs, a lot of, the Hubble and the Hubble telescope and others that are bringing us great images of deep space and all that kind of thing. But our ancestors saw it in the natural situation with the black of space or the deep purple of space as the backdrop and all these scintillating stars. Have either of you gentlemen ever seen a dark sky? Have you ever gone anywhere to see an actual dark sky? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I saw it once when I was in my 20s in a backwoods area of North Carolina in the dead of winter with snow on the ground and a brilliant clear sky. It took my breath.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It's like, wow. And you don't realize how polluted things are until you get to one of those places. So as far as current times and what we're experiencing now, would you say, well, first of all, would you say that the governments make all their moves based on astrology as well? Like the political moves and events, are they focusing on the astrology and taking advantage of it or not?
Deeper elements maybe of the government, not the surface level.
There have been specific and isolated individuals in American government elsewhere who've paid attention to it. Ronald Reagan was one because his wife, Nancy Reagan, knew about it because they were from California where it's all over everywhere. So, yeah, but no, they don't. Does the World Economic Forum do so? I have a close astrological associate in Australia who feels there is absolutely no doubt that the WEF and other people like that are using it. No, during the Third Reich, Hitler, unfortunately, was aware of a number of things of an esoteric and occult nature. Astrology is one of them. Apparently, that was used during the Third Reich to time some attacks and assaults and things of that nature. No, they don't. And there's an underlying issue here, which is this. The real truth of astrology will not speak itself to anyone who does not love creation. It will not speak itself. It will only give teensy bits and pieces of it. So if persons attempt to use it for nefarious means, they're not going to get the whole truth out of it, and they're going to do badly with it. Example, Hitler, Third Reich. And that would be the same, too, if any of the currently corrupt governments or the current governments that are corrupt, that which one is not? Okay. Right. If any of the current actors would attempt to do this, it would backfire on them. They would not be able to use it. The other truth, which we could switch the other way, is to say, if they want to use it, they need to come into a different state of mind.
Wow.
They needed to
right.
come into the state of mind of the fellowship of the universe. Astrology teaches the fellowship of the universe because it teaches that everything is one. If you study enough astrology, you cannot fail to understand that we are in a relationship with all the parts of the universe, and we therefore have a responsibility. It will make you into a nicer person. So it would be very good if, some of our political leaders would study this. I think they would probably have some changes of heart and stop being so cruel and judgmental and punitive against some of their people, and worse,
Right.
it would stop that. So no. Now, there are specific figures in government that have astrological advisors that they go to. When I was in North Carolina, I was friends with a now deceased astrologer by the name of Marilyn Holder. And she was in Raleigh, North Carolina. She'd been a journalist there. She had started her career as a journalist. She knew a lot of state politicians as a result of that. And at some point in her life, she switched over to being totally an astrologer. She had a bunch of political clients, including the governor of North Carolina at one point. So she came to the end of her life and asked me, I was an astrologer in that area at that time. She asked me if I would take over her clientele, and I was scared of it because I was only in my 40s and I wasn't as tough as I am now. I'm a lot tougher now that I'm in my 70s, but I wasn't. I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to do for them what they were accustomed to. But anyway, the point is, in the discussions with her, I found out she was advising a chunk of the North Carolina General Assembly and the governor of the state. So yes, yes, it does happen. How much do figures like that listen? I don't know, because I haven't been privy to those discussions, but we do know that Ronald Reagan's chief of staff was significantly irritated with the power that Joan Quigley, the astrologer to Ronald Reagan, had. He was significantly irritated because she was calling the times for press conferences and things of that nature. Calling the time for an event is a classic strategy in astrology to try to make it come out well, and there's specific rules for figuring when to do that. So I think that was probably legit. She was deciding on the press conference times, and Ronald Reagan, who was the chief of staff at that point, not Reagan, Regan, Regan, I don't know why they did that, but anyway, he was chief of staff. He didn't like it because he didn't understand the basis for it. But Reagan was outrageously popular.
Mm-hmm. Right. Interesting.
All
Yeah.
those choices added up to a very good impression. During that period of time, the press referred to Ronald Reagan as the Teflon president because nothing would stick to him. Teflon is a coating that used to be put on skillets and whatnot. So, when you were fixing eggs or something, it wouldn't stick to. Anyway, and part of that was because he kept appearing before the public in times that had been carefully selected by his astrologer, Joan Quigley, for that purpose.
Interesting. So right now, we kind of see disaster in the world stage. Are we in any sort of conjunction right now, or is there an astrological reasoning for what we're seeing right now?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. Yeah. The gigantic collapse points in modern history or recent history that are the models for the degree of fear that can be generated are the Great Depression in World War II and the use of nuclear weapons in World War II. So there's a gigantic astrological divide, thank God, between those periods of time and us now. And they are the Uranus-Pluto conjunction of 1965. So in the time of Great Depression, stock market collapse in the Great Depression and World War II, Uranus and Pluto were in the final stages of their then cycle. They were in closing cycle. And one thing we know from astrological, I know from studying astrological cycles, is that as major cycles get to the final stages and they're getting ready to restart again with the conjunction, everything winds down just like it does in cycle, in the final phases of the lunar cycle, and much worse, much more pronounced. So implosions, collapses, disasters, environmental disasters like the Dust Bowl of 1934 that contributed vastly to the starvation and unemployment of the United States during the Great Depression. That's all consistent with end of cycle, death of a cycle. And it was the Uranus-Pluto thing that was dying and came back to life in 1965. So we don't have that happening now. We also don't have the Uranus-Neptune cycle closing. We have it opening. So the two of the most powerful are opening. There's one more we haven't talked about, and that's the Neptune-Pluto cycle, which is about 500 years. So a half cycle of that is 250. Its most recent start was in 1891, and it has not reached full moon stage yet and will not in our lifetimes. And so we are on the safe side of 3 of the strongest cycles. Now at this time in 2023, we're on the safe side. Back in the 1929 with the stock market crash, the 1930s with the Great Depression, World War II with the 1940s, they were on the danger side of those, of 2 of those major cycles. They were on the safe side of 1 and the danger side of 2. Well, we're not. We're on the safe side of all 3 right now. Now, we've got some other shorter cycles that are coming and going that are problematic, but it's probably not going to manifest anything like the Great Depression or World War II.
So in other words, we should expect to see some sort of collapse and implosion. We're seeing it, but it's not going to turn out as bad for us this time.
I think that's right.
We make it through, you know.
I believe so. I have said to clients and astrology students and anybody else who would ever listen to me that for the lifetime periods of anybody that's alive right now, there will always be recovery in the financial and banking system. So, you know, as much as we can question the failure of the ethics that underpin capitalism and the banking system and all that jazz, it is not to anybody's advantage for any of that to collapse suddenly and with no provision and leaving a vacuum for all kinds of predation. And we don't want that to happen. We do not want that to happen. We're all served by a relatively workable system. Now, there's more to talk about in that regard. And as for what's driving the disastrous things that we have happening in the world and in the United States, there are 2. For one, the Saturn-Uranus cycle is about to close again. I mean, it is closing right now. It closes through 2032. The next conjunction of Saturn and Uranus will be 2032, and we're in the final stages of the Saturn-Uranus. That's a 45-year cycle, so it's relatively powerful. The other thing is specific to the United States birth chart. If one accepts that the United States of America was born on July 4th, 1776, with the signing of the Declaration of Independence, of course, some people don't, but if you do accept that July 4, 1776 as the birth date of the nation, then our country has a set of astrological positions: Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, just like an individual does. And the Pluto position is 28 degrees Capricorn, where Pluto has been for the last 2 years. Now, that doesn't happen very often. It takes Pluto 248 years to go all the way around the solar system, and hence 248 years to go all the way around the zodiac, and hence 248 years to get back to where it was at the birth of anything. The United States is therefore having what's called its Pluto return. This is not an easy thing. Who is Pluto? Pluto is the Latinized or Romanized name for the Greek god Hades. Hades was the god of the underworld, where the souls of the dead went after an incarnation to contemplate their deeds, good or bad, and go through a catharsis and a cleansing in preparation for the next experience on the spiritual path or reincarnation. Hades ruled in the underground world, in the dark, in the pressure, intense heat, the people that the entities couldn't get out of until he said they'd, done enough thinking, suffering, penance, the model for hell. You know? Yeah, that was ancient Greek theological conceptualization of how the path works. So that was Hades, which is Pluto, and we're now having the Pluto return. And what we're having is a gigantic national catharsis in which we're finding out about all this god-awful, stomach-turning corruption that we could deal with and talk about forever and ever. But that Pluto position is not going to be activated permanently. There are about 2 years, 2022 and 2023, that the worst of it. We get a little bit in 2024, and then we get a lot of relief shortly thereafter. So Pluto's the god of death, and we're having the Pluto return. And what that means is you get a big blast of Pluto, hard impression. You can't get away from it, of Pluto. So let's talk about that. What do you think Pluto's all about and how it's manifesting in our national life right now, 2022, 2023?
I mean, I think you pretty much just nailed it, but it's clear, it's apparent that, I was completely unaware of the Pluto return. Like I said, I don't follow astrology, so this makes sense to me. And you kind of just proved, these cycles. You proved how they affect us, every so many years. And so it's interesting that we're at that return right now. I mean, it makes perfect sense in my opinion.
It does make good sense. I think you're absolutely right. I don't care for the manifestations that we're seeing, but at the same time, I understand that it's absolutely part of our path that we've got to go through. Each position in a birth chart, and in this case, we're talking about the birth chart of the United States of America, each position has something to say about the character of that entity. So as a nation, we have Pluto in Capricorn. That means that over the 248 years of the existence of our country up to this point, back in the background and subconscious of our country, we've had a problem with corporate power. Capricorn, the negative side of Capricorn. We've had a problem with this from the beginning. It was a problem during the Civil War. The Civil War was, in many regards, I knew this is going to be an unpopular statement, but here we go. It was in many ways driven by the financial and commercial concerns of the bankers and the railroad executives of the North. They had a problem with the balance of payments and how much the South was putting in. It was a fight over money, veiled as a fight over race. I'm all for loving everybody, no matter what national or genetic origin. I'm for the goodness and happiness. I don't want to hurt anybody. I don't like the idea of breaking skin.
Right.
I ascribe to the old Hippocratic oath, which was against the cutting of skin. So I don't want to see anybody whipped, knifed, hurt, slapped, pushed down, denied their food or goodness or happiness or love or anything. I'm not for it. And I don't care what anybody looks like. It goes for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Amen.
But we have had a problem with the influence of corporate structures on governmental policy from the beginning.
Yes.
It's been in the background. It's, shown up here and there. We had antitrust legislation at one point to try to stop this stuff, and it was in effect for a while. And then it got out of hand, and we had the excesses of margin trading that led to the collapse of the stock market in the late 1920s. And then we had a lot of really good legislation to control that for a while. And then some people came and got rid of that. And then we went back to it. It's been back and forth, controlling that problem and then that problem coming right back up. And now we're awash in the evidence of regulatory capture, meaning that the industries that should be regulated by the three-letter agencies in the United States are instead in control of those agencies through money, through buying the executives there or putting their own executives into position there.
Right.
CDC, FDA, NIH, CIA, take your pick.
FBI. Yeah.
Exactly. Well said. I agree. And I'm glad to hear someone talking about it. This is things I think about a lot. We discuss it a lot, but it's all control. And we know follow the money. It's all money. And a lot of times, like the Civil War and other wars, to be quite frank, have all
other
been
wars.
funded,
Other wars.
have all been created or funded, so they can, for basically, I guess you could, political and financial gain. And, they create, the war is fought under the guise of something else. And, we can go on, but it's interesting to hear you break it down like that, because I agree. And I think that hopefully right now we're at a time where a lot of those ways are collapsing, and we can maybe, I guess what you see next, would that be considered like a rebirth after this Pluto return?
Yeah, the question could be asked, is the United States going to make it through this period in one piece? There are several ways to answer this, but let me bring a different piece of information into this discussion. It'll support what we're talking about. There is a 250-year cycle of empires that is acknowledged within conventional academic history. And it was arrived at by a study of this empire that existed throughout time by a scholar in the 20th century. And that person realized that on an average, it's about 250 years that empires exist in their original form. Well, that just happens to match to what? The Pluto return, right? Just going to happen at 248 years, 248, 250. There's no difference there. And this is just an average cycle that has been identified by conventional historians. So we are, as a nation, United States of America, at the limit point of that 250-year cycle that's acknowledged by conventional historians, which is the same as the time period specified by the Pluto return. So it is entirely possible that the United States may not make it through in its original form. And what would that mean? Could we actually have a collapse of the government? Could the Treasury go bankrupt? Could secession occur? Could several states leave the nation? Well, of course, Washington, D.C. won't allow that anymore. And now they've got nuclear weapons and fancy fighter planes to ensure that the secession clause is not allowed anymore. So I don't know. Actually, I would prefer that the United States not fall apart, because I was born into it and it's been my whole life. And with even all its faults, I still love it and want it to work. And I believe in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. I want to see those sacred documents lived by. So I'm not really for seeing this thing fall apart. I'd like for us to have a renewal of inspiration instead. I'd really rather see us be born again as a bunch of people that appreciate what's in the Constitution and what's in the Bill of Rights and get excited about that and treat each other well on the basis of that. I really would rather see that. But honestly, if you ask me, is there a possibility that something dire could happen to the federal structure? Yes. Yes, there is a threat of that. With the Pluto return and the end of that 250-year cycle, which is really the one and the same, you're just saying the same thing two different ways. Yes, it is that we are at a critical point at which our beloved union could actually crumble. So if it were to crumble, what would make it crumble? Well, the Pluto return itself doesn't tell that whole story. It gives some information, and the information would be excesses. Pluto's related to excesses and extremes, excesses in the area of corporate and government power. And, we see it playing out. The Biden administration right now is locked in an ongoing bitter dispute with federal courts about the language in the Bill of Rights.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Numerous lawsuits have been filed and are in process on this, on freedom of speech, on freedom from undue search. You all know what's going on.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, they're trying to take away freedom of speech. They're trying to,
freedom of thought.
freedom of thought, freedom of anything, forced injections against your will. You name it. They're trying everything they can right now.
Any
play
any
out.
sovereignty that we have. Yeah, like
Yeah.
any freedom that we have. That's, you know, to pulling
I
the rug
mean,
out from underneath of us,
if
because
you've
that's what
if you've read 1984, you know, it's like we're living it right now.
Yes. So the question that could be asked of me or any astrologer is, how far does this go? How bad is this going to get? I tend to be an optimistic individual. Some people probably think I'm a little bit too optimistic, but hey, I'm a Sagittarius and I come by it naturally. You know, life's cool and everything. I think we're going to make it through in some reasonable form. I feel really encouraged about the legal process that's going on right now. It's going to all get run right up to the Supreme Court, but the Bill of Rights up to this point has been affirmed several times by lower courts, and constitutional principles have been affirmed. So, you know, I think we're going to go in the right direction. I'm not sure that the Supreme Court will render the right decision in every case, but it's largely conservative at this point and is probably going to come out on the right side on basic questions on the Bill of Rights. So I feel somewhat encouraged there, or even a lot encouraged.
Well,
but I have some dates for you. I have some
Okay.
dates for you, short term, to watch to see what's going to happen. Okay. Pluto goes stationary direct smack on the Pluto position, 28 degrees Capricorn, on October 10 coming up, October 10. So that's, just less than a month away, October 10. And that's really going to bring everything to a head. Even before that, there's another astrological configuration that I think is going to bring a lot to evidence and to light, and that will be on October the 4th. And in that case, it's transiting Mars conjunct the transiting lunar south node. I know everybody doesn't understand what that is, but I'm just going to tell you what it is, and I'll explain in a moment. Transiting Mars conjunct the transiting lunar south node. And before I get into the technicals, let me tell you this. That same configuration was in effect on Black Monday in 1987, which was 500 point loss on the Dow Jones Industrial Average and a stock market collapse. Same configuration, and it was in effect one day before 9/11. Within 24 hours, it was exact of 9/11.
You know what's interesting? On the October 4th date, that's the date that's getting thrown around right now for the EBS alert.
I hear you.
I mean, I had no idea that there was some sort of alignment there, but that would indicate that somebody is utilizing or understands the significance of that date. Whether or not it actually plays out, they're still attempting something.
They may be just being driven by the energies.
Yeah,
it's either, I hear what you're saying. It's possible. It is a kind of an ominous influence. So it's when Mars and the lunar south node are at the same point in the zodiac. So the lunar south node is actually not a tangible body. It's a mathematical point in space caused by the interaction of the moon's orbit around the Earth intersecting with the plane of the solar system. It's a mathematical point, something we keep track of in astrology. Lunar south node, NODE. And we could come back to that if anybody wants to really see the technicals on that. I've got a diagram of it we could look at if you want to know about it. It happens once every just short of 24 months. So it's a regular repeating thing, but oddly, it was in effect at 2 points of historical concern, one being a massive collapse in the stock market. At the point that happened back in 1987, that was one of I think it was the biggest drop that had ever happened in the history, biggest percentage loss that had ever happened. And it shut down the market. They had to close it like 3:00 in the afternoon. They didn't know what to do. They were having such a slide. I think it usually closes at 4 anyway, but they closed it early that day. Yeah. So that was in October of 1987. So there were a lot of events of this nature every less than 2 years going down in history. But then it did happen to be in effect right on 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
So it's of concern. I would say watch it. And it's a strong influence that will be generating results for at least a week. And that would be centered on the 4th. So the week of October 1 through 7. I'm going to watch it maybe in a little bit earlier and later, but certainly October 1 through 7. And then we've got that October 10 date that is specific to the United States individual chart. And they're kind of coming pretty close together. I mean, October 4, 10, that's not, it's inside of the first 2 weeks of October. All of it. So I would say that the first 2 weeks of October 2023 are going to show us some important things and tell us which direction this Pluto return for the United States is really going to take. Are we going to have a national psychological death and rebirth and come to our senses? Or are we going to have a structural collapse?
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing all that with us. And I'm going to take your stance and be optimistic on our future, rather just our future as humanity at this point. Forget the United States, globally as humanity, because this is happening all over the world, not just here. I'm going to take that stance that after this return ends, that we're going to see some sort of a rebirth. We're going to make it through, and it might be rough. Things aren't going to look like they always have, but I do think we're going to make it out ahead. And that's why at the very beginning of this, you said you're a firm believer that your thoughts create your reality. So we have to constantly see that future and believe in that future and create that future for ourselves. And that's why all of this apocalyptic propaganda is being put out everywhere in the news and movies for decades now. And it's growing and growing and growing. Every movie you see is about some sort of apocalyptic future, because they want our thoughts to create that reality, because they can't do it without us. They need us.
Yes.
They need us to create that reality for them.
Yes.
That's why they want us to believe in it. So we have to change.
Oh, Tyler, that's so true. And it's so twisted and demonic, really, to do that. Let me tell you, I know you probably have to go. We're at about an hour and 15. But yes, after Pluto gets done with its USA return, it's going into the sign of Aquarius. And over the next few years, we're going to have a completely different set of energetic activations that are based more on Aquarius. So wherever Pluto is by sign, it digs deep into that archetype and brings out everything about it. In the area of Capricorn, it's going to be governmental and corporate power, because that's what that sign deals with. In Aquarius, it's a different story. It's possible that some misuses of that energy can occur. Humanity has misused about every kind of energy we've ever been supplied with by the universe, but there is a very good possibility to it, and that is that it brings out that sense of community and brotherhood and universal relatedness, which is the message of Aquarius.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
oh.
That's my sign.
Right.
You're an Aquarius?
Yeah.
All right.
There you go. Well, we'll go ahead and end on that note. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us. And can you please let people know how they can find you? And I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but Maureen will also be speaking at the conference that I'm speaking at in Springfield, Missouri. Margie K's the UnXNetwork's conference, the XCon, October 30th, 31st, and November 1st. So if you're interested in seeing her speak, as well as myself, those tickets are available at UnXNetwork.com, and that link is below in our description. But can you please let our audience know how to find you?
Certainly, and thank you for asking. You can always reach me by email, starsong1208@gmail.com. That's starsong, starsong1208@gmail.com. I also broadcast weekly on the UnX Digital Broadcasting Network, Wednesday nights. I believe this is 7 Central, or is it 6 Central? I should know. It's Wednesday nights.
Okay.
And the name of the show is Star Speak. STARSPAK, Star Speak, with astrologer Maureen Richmond. So look that up. I have a number of essays posted on my website, which is the Astrology of World Events. The Astrology of World Events. It's on Substack. If you just type in the Astrology of World Events on a Google or any other search line, it will take you directly there. The Astrology of World Events, and there you'll find some 35 essays that explore some of the correlations similar to what we've talked about here in this program.
Well, that's great. And I'll put that link below as well. And we look forward to meeting you in person at the conference. I'm excited about that. And thank you for joining us today. Thank you all for tuning in. We love you all. We can't do this without you. And until next time, Have a great evening. Good night.
Good night, guys.
A lot of this information has been kept sort of locked up or kept undercover because of the invasion of the Smithsonian group way back in the 1880s.
What actually happens is it's not taken to preserve it, it's taken to hide it.
And about 4.5 miles from here, a cave was discovered. It's not really a cave as such, it's a man-made cavern system.
But how the hell do you get that much granite? Because the granite on the base of that damn near weighs what the dirt on the top of it weighs. Nobody knows what's underneath it. I've heard a theory that there's a spaceship underneath it.
There was copper and steel plated artifacts that depicted men in armor with shields and helmets.
Including right here at Cahokia, there were reported 2 giants with double rows of teeth and 6 fingers and 6 toes.
Extra vertebrae or extra ribs in their cage. These are different races of people. They're not just regular humans.
Definitely is a stone burial chamber, and there's a large body in it, bones. I would say 15 to 16 feet.
I saw different types of extraterrestrials here with the Native Americans.
The peoples of the Cahokia Mounds actually saw the Birdman as some kind of cosmic being and not a humanoid being.
So this Birdman was the last and the pure and the true of his kind.
So yes, there were rituals or there were dances and celebrations, and people would dress up like the galactic beings that were visiting. But there were actual physical galactic beings that were visiting.